Okay, so this afternoon's session, we're going to be talking about AI in grant making and grant applications. So I thought it'd be interesting to start off by looking at what is happening across the charity sector at the moment. So who is using AI, and the Charity Digital Skills Report for 2025 has shown that there has been a slight increase in the number of charities that are using AI. So as you can see, there's been an increase. So 76% of charities are using AI, and that's an increase from last year, where it was 61% who are using AI. They've given a bit of a breakdown in terms of how they're using it. So for the 76% that are, 2% are using it either as a strategic or planning support, 51% are exploring the tool usage, and 23% are piloting and using AI. So some organisations and charities are in that very, very early stage of using AI, but some obviously are using it at a much more strategic level. And that goes into a bit more detail where it says 89% of large charities are using AI compared to 72% of small charities. And obviously there may be reasons behind that, particularly if you're thinking about how charities are using it. So for example, if you're a larger charity, you may have already gone through some kind of AI training. You may or may not have had your trustees or board of directors or committee having reviewed AI, and are therefore much more confident in using AI throughout your organisation. There also may be, for smaller charities, it may be that you haven't had that training, you're a bit more nervous about using it, and therefore you might still be in those sort of exploring stage of it, of the process. So they've also talked about the top 3 ways that AI is being used. So a majority of it is about administration and project management. There's also talks about a third of, or just over a third of organisations are using it for grant or fundraising in some kind of way. And then another third are sort of using it for comms and fundraising. I'd be interested if you maybe just pop into the chat whether or not your organisation is using fundraising in some kind of way, or you can put maybe a thumbs up if your organisation is using it. And also you might want to pop into the chat if your organisation isn't using it, why not? And if you are, how are you using it so far? And it may be that it might be on an individual basis or a team basis, or it may be that your organisation is fully sort of involved with AI and has got a policy and a strategy and all those good things. I'll carry on, but obviously, please feel free to pop it into the chat. So we'll talk about some of the opportunities and pros of using AI. So it can take on repetitive and or sort of administrative tasks. So it could be things like meeting notes, replies to emails. It can help with things like checking grammar and spelling. It can help increase efficiency and capacity. It can help with generating ideas. I know a lot of organisations use AI around marketing, so it can help those who really hate staring at a blank page, and you can ask it to give you 20 ideas on, let's say, a fundraising activity, or 20 ideas of some kind of tagline for a service that you're going to be delivering. Organisations can also use it for data and research. So if you're analysing data or you need to do a particular type of research, it can help you detect anomalies, if I can say that right. It can help you spot any patterns or trends. Some AI tools can look at predicting or forecasting based on existing data that you put into it. It can create summaries, create graphs and charts. I'm going to talk a bit more about some tools, some AI tools that are specific for looking at research as well, that might be useful to organisations. It can help with planning, so strategy, thinking about decision making and problem solving, providing outlines for reports or being able to review drafts. It can help planning for individuals or a team or an organisational level, and it can break down quite complex tasks into smaller subtasks. It can, looking at increased accessibility, obviously AI is more accessible than ever at the moment. I think in the last sort of 3 years or so, it's become more and more accessible, and it has the possibility of creating more of a level playing field between smaller and larger charities and organisations, and particularly those where perhaps English isn't their first language. But we also have to consider some of the challenges and the cons for using AI. So part of that is obviously looking at the environmental impact of using AI. So there are energy and water requirements for AI. So for example, a single chat GPT conversation uses the equivalent of a 500 ml bottle of water. So therefore you have to be quite mindful about when and where you're going to be using AI, because it does have an environmental impact. Thinking about data privacy and security. So if you're using a free AI tool, it's likely that data that you're putting into that sort of request for the data tool to carry out, it's likely that data isn't secure, and it might also be being held by that platform to use elsewhere. So it's really important, particularly when you're using free AI tools, is that you don't put any sensitive or confidential or personal information into them, or information that's covered by intellectual property. It's also being used more and more by scammers and fraudsters. So whether it's being able to being used to imitate an email from an official organisation, or if it's being used for identity theft, they're being obviously more and more creative in how it can be used. So whether that's emails or even videos. There's obviously a lot of news out there about deep fakes being used and coming up on the internet, and obviously at different areas such as X and Twitter and things like that. There's also concerns out there about job insecurity, so whether there's going to be fewer entry-level jobs as AI can take on those admin tasks. On the flip side of that is that it may be that it could create new job opportunities because of those administration tasks have been taken care of. Then there's also thinking about the bias and ethical concerns as well. So in terms of data, that AI creates responses from data and information, and often that data and information is coming from the internet, as well as it could be specific reports that are on there, but a lot of it is coming from information from the internet. And if that information is coming from the internet, then we often know that there is bias or prejudice or problematic information out there that has been created by human beings, and human beings are inherently biased and prejudiced. And so therefore the information that then AI generates and gives back to you can have that bias and prejudice built within it. And some of that is kind of almost like a bias loop. And I just wanted to give an example that I saw recently, and I even tested it out myself today to sort of double check if it was still there. So some of you might know that with, for example, Google, it often now when you put into for a search, it will come up with an AI summary. So it would have looked through all of the different websites that are out there and had therefore come up with a neat little summary at the top. So you don't necessarily have to trawl through all of the website hits it comes back with. So I asked it 2 questions. One of them was, who found the cure for scurvy? Now, the first answer it came back was the cure for scurvy was demonstrated by the Scottish naval surgeon James Lind in 1747, who conducted one of the first recorded clinical trials and proved that citrus fruits were an effective remedy. So that's one answer it gives you. I then asked the question, when was the cure for scurvy found in China? The knowledge, and it came back with this, the knowledge of how to prevent scurvy in China existed as early as the 5th century. So that's 1,200 years earlier, at least, than the sort of answer that it's given previously about James Lind. So there is that inbuilt bias in there where it might, for example, be giving you information based on biases that already exist, for example, racial biases, gender biases, all those sorts of things. So you have to be quite critical about the information that it's going to give back to you. And sometimes asking questions in different ways will give you different answers. And that leads on to quality control. So there can be inaccuracies with AI, and AI can what they call hallucinate, which is where they create a false or misleading information, but they can word it to you in such a way that it seems quite plausible. So large language models, which is what a lot of the common AI tools that are out there are, they're trained to predict the next word. And sometimes if it doesn't know what that next word is, it will generate something, it will create something which might seem logical to the large language model, but it might not actually be what you're looking for. And then costs. So there are, as I've mentioned, free tools, so free versions of AI tools out there. But as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that your data then is being protected or that it's secure. So there are paid for versions that can be sort of between £10 to £20 a month. That then often mean that your data is more secure. And that you often get then a better version than the basic free tool. But obviously, if depending how you use AI, you might need multiple different tools, and sometimes those costs can creep up. So that's something as well to consider when you're thinking about using AI within your organization. So I'm just going to talk about some of the main AI tools. There are so many different tools out there. I can see from the chat as well that some people are using AI already. Some people are using it for social media. Some people are using it for admin tasks. Some people are using it for research. So there are going to be different AI tools that are going to be best for you and your tasks that you're going to be doing. As I said, these are just 5 I'm going to talk about, but there's a lot more out there. So the one that people have most heard of probably is ChatGPT. So it's a chatbot that was founded by OpenAI, and it generates responses to questions or to commands. So it can do quite a range of things. It can generate text, it can generate images, it can analyze data and images. It can hold a conversation with you, either by text or voice. And if you pay for it, you can also create a custom GPT. You can also create agents, as they call it, and have faster response time, and also advanced research if you go for a paid version. Claude AI, it's another sort of large language model, and has a chatbot. So in some ways is quite similar to Chat GPT, but it has more of a focus on text-based conversation and more focus on writing. So it's more, I would probably say, suited towards writing and using it for tools such as editing, or generating text. It can also take on quite large pieces of text. So I think documents up to sort of around 150 pages. So it can summarize that information quite easily and pick out the key points for that. Again, there are paid for options and free options. Then there is Perplexity, which is very much geared towards research. So it's an AI-powered search engine. So it does also have that large language model. So it can obviously create text and respond to questions. But what it would normally be doing is, if you put in a search around, a question about, for example, sort of what are the best practices around tackling youth violence in the UK, just as an example, it will come back with an answer that also includes links to where it has found that source information. So, for example, it will tell you, it will give you maybe a top 10 best ways of tackling youth violence, but then it will give you the links to maybe to those reports or websites where it found that information, which can be quite useful if you want to sort of fact check it. Again, it's got a free version and a paid for version. There's Gemini, which is linked to Google. So it's quite similar in that it has a chat bot, but it can also link to Google Documents as well. And then finally, Microsoft Copilot, which is Microsoft version, and again has that sort of chat bot capability, but also can then work within any Microsoft documents that you have. There are lots of other AI tools out there. For example, Canva has got an AI tool built into it now. Grammarly, which I imagine a lot of us have used at some point for supporting editing text. There's Otter AI, again, another tool that lots of people use for transcribing and note-taking in meetings. And Charity Excellence, they have an AI bunny, and also a bid writer built into it. So those are just some of the tools. I am by no means an expert on AI. However, we have had some training in the past with AI Confident, and hopefully this is some useful information that is going to be a starting point for you, where you can then go on, and perhaps your organisations might do their own research, get their own training, and review about what's going to be best for your organisation moving forward. So I'll just go over now NCF's statement on using AI and our perspective on it, particularly in relation to grant applications, but also end of grant reports. So over the last year or so in particular, we have seen applications coming in that have used AI, and then we've also seen some end of grant reports, not so many, but some which have also used AI to complete them. What I have often said is that it's very easy for us to spot when AI has been used. If it's been used badly, then it's quite easy to spot. If AI is being used well, then it's probably going to be quite hard for us to spot if it's been used or not. And having taken advice and seen what other grant makers are doing across the UK, it's very hard to police AI, and so this is the stance that we're taking on it. So we know that increasingly AI tools are going to be used to support writing and research, and we recognise their potential for applicants who are new to funding or face barriers to accessing funding. And therefore, if you choose to write an application using AI tools, you won't be automatically rejected for that application solely because you've used AI. But it's good to, it's good to point out that a bad application is a bad application, whether or not it's used AI. So even though we won't, as I said, we'll be rejecting applications, if it's a bad application, it will be rejected because it's been written badly. So we want to talk about how you can use AI responsibly. So here are sort of some of the things that we think that you should think about. Our messaging is also very similar to that of the National Lottery as well. Their stance on AI, we've sort of taken inspiration from them, and they also worked with AI Confident on sort of their statement around using AI. So the top things are to make it personal. So edit AI generated content so that it's reflecting your experience, your community's voice, and the impact that you're looking to make. To be specific, so to think about those who, what, where, why, when questions. Often AI generated content can be quite vague and very surface level without much depth to it, particularly in relation to place. Also, you need to check for accuracy. So again, we've talked about that quality control. So making sure that the AI output is using data from a trusted source and that it's accurate and true. Reviewing the budget. This is a big one. AI is not that great at numbers. If you ask it to do a sum, because it's a language-based model, it often gets sums and things like that wrong. So you really definitely have to make sure that you're checking the budget if you are using any AI tools to support applications. Obviously, being mindful of data privacy. So as I've mentioned earlier, making sure that if you're using any free tools that you're not putting in any sensitive data in there, particularly around individuals and their information. And thinking about the impact on the environment as well. So they have to weigh up whether that AI supported application is going to really improve the application. Is it really worth using an AI tool to help you? Is it going to save you time? Is it going to make it better? And if not, would it be better to sort of focus on your own content generation? And as I said, that's thinking about not only grant applications, but also end of grant reports as well. We are going to be continually reviewing the use of AI as AI changes and grows over the coming years and how it evolves. We do have an AI working group within NCF, so we are looking at sort of best practice out there from other fund makers, grant makers in the VCSE sector and beyond. Talking about sort of other grant makers and funders out there, I recently went along to a meeting where grant makers were talking about the use of AI in grant applications. And here are some of the things that came up. Now, they obviously also talked about all the positive things as well, but I wanted to share some of the concerns that funders have when looking at an AI generated application. So one of the big things was the loss of an authentic voice. So often they don't feel personal or unique, or it lacks that authentic voice from the organisation or the community, and it can be quite generic in terms of its writing style. Then thinking about the vagueness and repetition, sometimes there are phrases that you will see coming up quite often in AI generated applications. It can, as I mentioned earlier, it can be quite vague, so quite surface level, so it doesn't have any specific information about perhaps the organizations that you're working with, or it's not very specific in terms of the actual activity that you're looking to deliver. It can lack some of that detailed information, which is again a sort of a telltale sign that it's not been written by a person, it's been written by AI. And as I said, it's lacking that sort of specificity and detail. In terms of technical errors, we haven't seen it yet, I don't think, though Laura might correct me if I'm wrong. But sometimes people will, when they're copying the information that they've got from their AI, is that they'll also include the AI prompts. So they will copy the question of, please write me a such and such, and they'll copy that, or they'll sort of copy the fact that it's come from an AI generated and put that in the text box. So again, there's that technical error of using AI. Also, it's quite common when looking at sort of AI generated text. There are some things that I often see: bullet points or things being numbered, or I'm seeing more of like little emojis or icons being used in AI generated text that are, as I said, are kind of telltale signs that it hasn't been written by a human being. And not that that's necessarily bad, but that a human being then hasn't gone back and put in their own thoughts into it or reviewed it is more of the concern. There's also concern from funders about the application volume. So some organisations have seen quite a large increase in applications because being AI generated, it means that perhaps you might be able to create lots and lots of applications in the same amount of time that it might have taken you to do one application. So therefore, there's perhaps a sort of bigger increase and demand on funders because it's making it easier to submit an application, which can cause things to be a bit overwhelmed. Funders also have concerns about equity, because obviously some organisations might start using AI while others might not. And so there is the concern about, obviously, in some organisations might be using AI really well because they might have had some training or support, and some might be using AI and it might not be using it in a great way. And so therefore, again, there is creating that sort of inequity of applications coming forward. And you might, obviously, there is the possibility that it could create that level playing field where some organisations have got a paid fundraiser or a paid bid writer, and another organisation might have a volunteers who that might not be their expertise in writing applications, and so AI tools might be able to support them, but it can go the other way as well. So some things to think about before going down that AI journey. So has your organisation got an AI policy in place? There are examples out there on the internet. So Charity Excellence, which I mentioned earlier, they have a template that could be a good starting point for your organisation to look at. You also should have a think about if your trustees, your committee, or your board of directors have reviewed the use of AI in AI in the organisation. Have you got their support to use it? Have they thought about all the things around risk and safeguarding and training that needs to be put in place? Obviously, using AI is a skill because it's a tool, and so getting in training from an expert can be really important to ensure that you're maximising its potential whilst minimising your risk. And obviously, you might decide that AI is not the sort of the thing for your organisation at the moment, and talking to an AI expert might be able to give you the reasons about why you should or why you shouldn't use it, and help your organisation come to a decision. Make sure that you aren't taking the human being out of the process. So however you're using AI, make sure that you have a human being who has oversight of what's happening to do all of those things like checking for accuracy and checking for fairness. And make sure also that you're picking the right tool for the job. So I've talked about some of those AI tools earlier on. There are lots of AI tools out there, but think about what it is that you want the AI tool to do, and therefore which is the best one to do the job, because they're all slightly different. So talking about AI prompts. So last year, as I mentioned, we had a session with AI Confident, who gave it was Tim Cook from their organisation who gave who was with us for an afternoon and gave us a lot of information about AI and how to look to try and get the best out of it. And part of that was thinking about what's the best way of asking AI a question, or to giving it a job to do in order to get the best out of it. So obviously what you don't want to do is do something at the top, such as write an application for funding for a youth group for £5,000. That sort of one sentence prompt gives very little information for the AI tool to go off of, and so therefore it's more likely to generate and create things that aren't accurate and aren't true about your organisation or your service. So if you are thinking about using an AI tool, here are some sort of tips on and hints on what you could do in terms of a prompt. So giving the AI tool some context about your organisation and what it is that you do. So who are your beneficiaries? What services do you deliver? Do you work with other organisations? And again, being mindful about that information that you're telling it, making sure that it's not going to be breaking any data GDPR rules around that. You then need to give it a task, so a clear job to do. So if you're asking it to create a plan, are you asking it to review a draft application that you've put together? Are you asking it to create a draft? Are you asking it for advice, or what to or not to include within a grant application? You also then should try and give it a role. So you're asking it to act as an expert. So please take on the role of an expert such and such. So it could be the role of an expert bid writer, the role of an expert grants assessor, whatever it is that you're thinking of to help you that might support your task. Then you have to think about what data and information it might need in order to be able to do the task accurately. So do you need to give it specific data about your organisation? Do you need to upload a document or a link to a report that's talking about particular needs in the area, so that it has that information to be able to refer to, so that it can have, again, some more context about what it needs to take into account when writing or creating or completing the task that you've set it. And then thinking about style. So what tone of voice or style you want it to write in. Again, similar to the data, you could upload documents or link it to websites to help the AI tool understand your style of writing or your organization's style of writing, so that it can try and imitate that as much as possible. But always make sure that whatever you have asked the AI tool to do, that you are reviewing it and that you're editing the response that it gives you, so that you can make sure it is reflective of your organisation, your services, what you're asking. And as I've mentioned before, don't trust it with numbers in terms of budget and things like that. It is a tool, so it isn't a magic bullet that can do everything for you. So think of it as a tool rather than it can complete everything on your behalf. It might be there to support you, but it can't do it all for you. So that's a sort of a run through of our stance on using AI within grant applications. I would always suggest looking at other funders' stances on AI. It's going to be different for different organisations. Some funders may have not yet set out their stall in terms of how they are approaching AI, so they may not have put out a statement yet saying whether or not they will accept applications that have used AI. But obviously you might it might come across that if you have used AI, then your and they can see that within the application that your application might be rejected. So have a conversation with the funder, and obviously think about all of those sort of things around data and security and trustees and your committee before you start sort of blazing a trail down using AI. It isn't necessarily going to make things better. It can sometimes make things worse. So really have to consider things before you start using it. So I'm going to stop the presentation now, and then we can go to a Q&A if anybody has got any questions.